everyone, I hope you're all doing really well and welcome back to my YouTube channel. For those of you that are new here, I'm Becca. I'm a professional pet portrait and wildlife artist specialising in realistic colour pencil drawings of animals. So I've been working on this little Spaniel tutorial. I believe this is part 5, I think. We've got quite a lot of it done already. So for part 5 I'm going to be filling in the right ear. Now we can't see as much of the right ear as we can with the left. So this part to this tutorial is probably going to be kept quite short. And then we've literally just got both of the paws to do on either side and a little bit more of that shadow underneath, and then we're pretty much done. So I'm going to make a start on the right ear. So I'm going to start by using the Buff Titanium Luminance pencil. I always like to pick out the palest colour that I can see in the reference photo in terms of like that particular section that we're drawing. So in this case it's like a really pale creamy yellow colour, like kind of like off-white, and I'm just working into some of these flyaways along the edge of the ear, keeping my pencil fairly loose by holding it more towards the top to get that kind of movement in there. And you want to apply a fairly light pressure, but just flick each pencil stroke and kind of curve it round as you go. Like that, and then I'm also just going to fill in the rest of the ear and the rest of this little section that we're going to be drawing for part 5. You always want to shade in the same direction as the fur, and I'm just using like a light to medium pressure just to fill everything in. I've gone in with a fairly bluntish pencil to start with anyway, because I just think it gives you a bit of like a flatter side to work with, so you can get more of an even coverage when you're shading. There's a lot of flyaway hairs kind of coming around from its mouth and its like snout area that are falling in front of this right ear. So just to kind of make it look like they're in front, you want to start off by flicking kind of down towards those flyaway hairs. So I'm kind of flicking towards the left all the way down, leaving little gaps in between, which will obviously represent those hairs that are falling in front. So I'm going to leave that there with the Buff Titanium. Now next up, sticking with the Luminance pencils, I'm going to go in with the Brown Ochre 10%, which is a little bit darker. And you just want to start filling in where that more kind of gingery fur is, and leave that Buff Titanium as it is in those palest areas. So I'm kind of flicking up towards that those flyaway hairs, but releasing my pressure sort of so far along. Also, if you just look at the top of the head, there's some of these flyaway kind of pale hairs as well falling in front of the base of the ear. So what you want to do with your Brown Ochre 10% is sort of flick back down into that area, a little bit like we just did round here. Flick back down towards the head, leaving little gaps in between. And as we keep darkening this gingery section going down the ear, these paler flyaway hairs at the top of the head will just become a little bit more obvious. So I'm just going to fill in the rest of that gingery fur, following the same direction as the tufts. I'm just using like a light pressure at this point as well. Now this little bit at the side of the face is really quite dark, so you don't really need to shade with your paler colours at this point. You can just I'm kind of working into it a little bit, but I'm just leaving it sort of as it is. I'm not pressing down harder just because that section is like really dark. You can just go in straight away with dark colours. You don't need to build it up with pale colours like this. So I'm just going to bring it down to about here, and then in the next few parts we'll be filling in those pores. So I'm just going to leave this as it is for now. Just literally draw that ear to where we can see it. It kind of curls under a little bit. You can also do some flyaway hairs as well. Kind of avoiding the very top of the ear because they're really pale, but kind of coming down the ear where the fur is more gingery and not being kind of directly hit by the light like it is at the top. You can do some of these flyaway hairs. It's still quite a pale colour, so it's kind of a good one to do that with because it will show up against the paper but not be kind of too in your face. So something like that. Briefly with the warm grey one, I'm just going to work into the side of the kind of snout area down here. Just kind of doing what we were doing before, leaving little gaps in between and kind of flicking towards that section. This is definitely not the easiest tutorial to do. It's not the easiest subject to draw. There's a lot of sort of overlapping sections, and I think in general spaniels are quite sort of complex to draw, especially with the ears and all these overlapping tufts and like everything like that. So if you are struggling with it, then please send me a picture on Instagram at Becca Barron Art, and I will reply when I can with some advice or guidance on, you know, how to get you back on the right track. I have left, as usual, the reference photo, line drawing and a full materials list in the description below, so you can kind of follow through from the beginning. And the materials list lists all the colours that I use in order, so you can literally follow through like that, step by step, and obviously sort of use what I'm doing as a guide. I'm also just going to use this warm grey one at the very top of the ear, just to work into some of these pale flyaways. This is a really subtle pale colour. Again, it's like an off-white sort of neutral tone. So it's just going to make some of these paler hairs just stand out a little bit more against that paper without being too overpowering. It's going to keep it quite subtle. Something like that. Next up, I'm going to use the shade Butternut, which is another Luminance pencil and a little bit more vibrant. And I'm going to start working into the right hand side of the ear, just to make that colour a little bit more orangey. I'm just using a light to medium pressure. I think I mentioned this in the previous part when we drew the left ear, but in the first few initial layers you can afford to be quite sketchy with it. I think it adds to that kind of movement within the ear, and you know, all these little tufts that make up the ear, in 2 seconds when the dog moves, all these tufts will have moved as well, so it's not like they're set in stone. So if you do something slightly different to the reference photo, where you add like an extra curl or something flicking out, I think it can actually add to the texture of what you're drawing. So yeah, kind of be a bit loose with it and add to that movement. So I'm going to leave that there with the butternut. Next up, I'm going to briefly go in with the Warm Earth 5%, which is like a really nice warm pinky tone. And I'm just going to add a light layer into that gingery fur. I'm extending some of these hairs from kind of like above the eye. And I'm just going to leave it like that. You don't want to add too much. We still want those orangey colours kind of showing through from underneath. Next up, I'm going to go in with the shade Beastry, which is a polychromo, and it's quite a lot darker than what we've used so far. So with this, we want to start mapping out a bit more kind of structure within the ear. So this is where I'm going to start to kind of tighten up these main tufts within the ear. Kind of breaking it down into separate sort of shapes. And I'm also going to add kind of a light layer into this shadowy part. So you want to work into basically that shadow all the way down the side of the face. Just make it a little bit darker. I've added sort of 1 or 2 layers into this area, going all the way down. Kind of flicking down towards those flyaway hairs on top of the head. And then gradually kind of fading off your colour into more of those gingery tones. And once you've mapped everything out, all those shapes, and we can kind of visualise where all those tufts are a little bit more. Like that. And then with an even darker colour, the Van-Dyck Brown, I'm going to literally go over the exact same areas that we've just worked into, remembering to kind of flick down into all of these tiny little hairs that are kind of in front of the ear. I'm using a sort of medium pressure. Just working into some of those shadows within the tufts. So I've kept a fairly even coverage all over, and I've kept my pressure, you know, fairly kind of light to medium. So it should look at this point quite grainy. And this is usually like the ugly stage that most artists kind of want to avoid, because obviously it doesn't look realistic. It's picking up all that grain from the paper and we don't really like it. We just want everything to look smooth as soon as possible. But you kind of just need to like trust the process and keep building up your layers gradually. The more kind of colours and subtle layers that you add, the more it's going to kind of capture that light in, really rich in that ginger fir. And we can get all those details in at the end as well, because there'll still be some kind of tooth to work with. So I'm going to go a shade even darker now and use the Walnut Brown, and again go over the same areas with a medium pressure. So we're kind of slowly building up that contrast between those light and dark areas. So I'm flicking back towards sort of the edge of the face. So we've got some of these really soft little tufts that are falling in front of the ear. That's the illusion that we're trying to get. Just going to briefly go back in with that brown ochre 10%, just to extend some of this gingery fur kind of into those flyaways. Just kind of flick up towards that area. Like that. With the raw sienna, which is a lovely kind of rich gingery tone, I'm going to go over those same areas, just kind of working into those flyaways, just along the edge of that shadow going down the ear. I'm just going to add a little bit of the raw Umber polychromo, again to these like gingery parts on the edge of the shadow going down, sort of flicking them into those flyaways along the edge. Again, this is kind of like a really rich goldeny yellow colour, so it'll be really nice for adding to that richness and sort of vibrancy with that ginger fur. And then to really increase that contrast, I'm going to go in with the dark sepia with a medium to hard pressure now, especially in those darkest areas, so especially like here by the side of the face. You want to start to squash the tooth of the paper down to remove that kind of grainy texture. I'm still kind of shading towards that bit of fur. And then I'm going to do the same for this bit down here. Kind of flicking down towards that section, leaving gaps in between. And then just kind of shading in around them, around those tufts. So back and forth motions, kind of flicking down towards like the top of the head, leaving gaps in between, and then flicking up towards that gingery fur and those kind of flyaways. And if you release your pressure at the end of each line, just keeps everything looking really soft. And it's like a nice, soft, gradual change from one pigment into another. So I'm actually now going to go in with the black, but I'm just going to use this on the side of the face here where it's really, really dark. You want to apply a fairly hard pressure, but then kind of fade it off into the rest of that dark brown fur. I think I'm just going to add a tiny little bit just up here as well. Just in those darkest shadows, like that. I'm going to go back in with the bee-string into some of those lighter gingery parts. And with a medium to hard pressure, you kind of want to merge the edges of that shadow into those kind of gingery colours. And it'll just as well help to squash down the teeth of the paper and get rid of that grain. I'm also going to go back in with the Van-Dyck Brown and basically just do the same sort of thing. This is more of like a lighter kind of chocolatey brown in comparison with those dark shadows. So even by darkening some of these tufts within the ear, those really nice gingery kind of undertones are showing through from underneath. Just going to do some really subtle flyaway hairs using the sharpest part of the point, holding my pencil right at the top so it's really loose, and literally just brushing it across the surface. Like I'm not applying any pressure whatsoever really. Like that. I'm now going to go in with the burnt umber, again just to kind of merge the edges of those shadows in with some of that gingery fur, and just to kind of remove even more of that grainy texture. So you can see how I'm also shading around some of these tufts, these like flyaways on top of the spaniel's head that are falling in front of the ear. And gradually we're starting to see kind of each individual one. So now everything should be looking a lot smoother. So just to smudge out some of those edges, I'm going to use the brown ochre 10%. Just kind of dragging along some of those tufts. So it's more of like a gradual, you know, end of each tuft or each hair. It's kind of fading off and showing how like wispy and sort of fluffy the fur is. I'm also going to use the buff titanium again, literally just to do the same thing. Like that. I have added these two kind of extra little tufts, and maybe I have brought them out too wide. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but if you've kind of added extra tufts that you don't really want anymore, the Tombow ultrafine Monozero Elastomer eraser, that's a massive mouthful, but it's basically like a little rubber that you can have maximum control over because you can hold it like a pen or a pencil. So if you do some tufts that you just want to take back a little bit, just erase the edges and kind of flick back into them. And it'll just make them a little bit more subtle and remove some of that pigment like that. I think in general, colour pencils on this surface, the extra white hot pressed Fabriano Artistico paper, if you do want to rub anything out, it is quite good at removing pigments on this paper. So yeah, don't panic if you do something a little bit wrong or too big. Like I said, Spaniel's ears are all over the place anyway, so the reference photo is only there as a guide, really. You don't have to copy it sort of tuft by tuft. You can put your own spin on it as well. So we've nearly finished it really, but just for these last few steps, I'm going to go in with the cold grey one, just to add in some extra flyaway hairs to the very top of the ear. Again, this is like an off-white colour. It's really, really pale, but it's more of like an icy white, an icy grey, rather than that pale yellow like that buff titanium is. Like that. And then I'm going to go in with the craft knife slice tool. This is always my favourite bit because it really adds that detail. We can pull out those highlights and it just really elevates that kind of realistic element in your work. So all these little tufts that we've been kind of shading round from the head or from its face, you can work into them and kind of flick into that ear section that we've drawn. It just kind of finishes the hair off nicely because as you release your pressure, it kind of goes into a point. So you want to do that all the way along. You want to have some really faint, kind of subtle ones as well. So for that you might want to use more of the point of the ceramic blade rather than the curved edge. Curved edge just gives you a bit of a thicker line. Just going to add a tiny little bit of texture just along this edge here of the face, so it looks a bit more natural. We don't want it to be perfectly smooth because obviously it's still loads of hairs together at the end of the day. And then just like we've done up here, we want to do the same around like the snout area. Added a bit of a curved sort of a whisker that can just about be seen amongst that shadow. And I'm just going to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of kind of shine to areas of the ear. So if you work in the lightest parts, and kind of follow some of those tufts round as they curve. It just adds to that texture a little bit and kind of pulls out some of those highlights. There's also a big whisker kind of coming out of its eyebrow, so that's what we're going to finish off on. For the other whiskers in the previous parts, I think I explained how I find that the easiest way to do whiskers is be quick and like flick at the end. That rhymes. But basically you want to see where the whisker's kind of originating from, head in the right sort of direction and look at where it ends and just kind of go for it really. So it starts around about here, kind of directly above the eye, and just going to go for it. Now obviously we can't draw with the craft knife slice tool onto just paper because there's no pigment to be raised, so there's nothing to be seen, but we can draw in that little bit that can be seen and brighten it up a little bit with the buff titanium just by working into what we've etched out, just to make that line a little bit brighter. And then using either a cold grey one or like a warm grey one, something that's really kind of pale and neutral. I think I'm going to go for the warm grey one. You just want to kind of carry on that whisker. Keep your pressure really light in case you do kind of get it in the wrong sort of direction, but something like that. I don't know if the camera is picking it up brilliantly because it's quite pale, but then you can go over it once you've done that initial outline and be a bit more careful with it. Just kind of thicken up that line a little bit, keeping the edge like really light, and so it looks like it's kind of flicking down and gradually kind of disappearing because it's such a faint line. If you wanted to define or just neaten up like the edges of the whisker, you can add a little bit of shadow around it, but just make it look like it's still part of that fur underneath. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we can see that whisker now. Let's just join them up a little bit more, like that. We've got those like flyaway hairs from the face falling in front of the ear. We've got all those shadows and that lovely kind of orange undertone as well going on. So I know that was a bit of a shorter part to this tutorial, but now we've literally got the entire face done. We've just got those two little paws to do on either side, and then hopefully you'll have yourself a really nice realistic full portrait of a Spaniel. So as I said at the start, I have left the full materials list, the line drawing and the reference photo in the video description below. I've also left a link to part 1, so if you wanted to go back and kind of re-watch things from the start, then you can do. And like I said as well, if you are struggling with any little bits, then, you know, feel free to message me on Instagram and I will get back to you when I can with a bit of guidance if you get a bit stuck with anything. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed this tutorial and subscribe to my channel to see more tutorials and art related content. So I'll be back shortly with part 6 where we'll be doing the paw. And yeah, thanks for watching and I'll see you shortly.